All right, guys, what is going on? I am a mess. I've been working all day. It's the 4th of July. You guys are probably, uh, out hanging out with your families, doing your vacation thing, but I'm here working because got a job I'm trying to get done, and this was one of my only days to work on it that I had time. So this 4Runner, which I mentioned was the first job I've had in this new shop here. I had to pull the transmission out. Um, so the transmission is out finally. And let's take a look. Hopefully, the quality of this stream is good enough to show you what's going on with it because I have kind of crappy service on this side of town, especially in this building. But let's see. Yeah, as you can see, there's a big crack all the way around the case here. So, right on top. So it was leaking transmission fluid everywhere, and you know, it would normally lead you to think that it was coming from the lines because the lines are pretty close to where this crack is when it's running down and dripping down. But no, this case is cracked. I've never actually heard of this being an issue for these things, but you know, I guess anything can happen. I don't know if it got bottomed out and cracked or what happened to make that failure occur, but whatever it was, it happened. So next step is going to be getting this other transmission in. So this is going to be the new transmission in it. I'm probably going to pull the transfer case off it before I attempt to stick it up in the hole. But in the meantime, I got to clean my floor because I wasn't thinking, and I had the speed sensor taken out of the back of the transmission, and when I dropped it out, it poured all the transmission fluid out of the transfer case, and there's a lake of transmission fluid on my floor. So, yeah, no fun. No fun at all. But no big deal. I'll probably push this thing back or something and use some speed dry on it and get it cleaned up before I attempt to install the new transmission here. So, yeah. I'm trying to think here. The hardest thing about this job, honestly, is really the bell housing bolts. If you are attempting to do these transmissions, the best thing I can tell you is you need to get an impact. If your transmission, if you have a 4Runner, you're working on it, and your bell housing bolts were in as tight as mine, there's absolutely no physical possible way you're gonna break free those bolts without some power tool of some type. I use an electric impact. Had to charge a battery twice. That's how much it had to work to pull those bolts out. Um, so no, I don't. So that's pretty much the toughest part about it. Getting to all the bolts isn't too horrible because you can just pull the transmission mount out, and then there's just the two motor mounts. And what I did was I used a jack to tilt the whole motor and transmission back, which gave me pretty good clear access to the top bell housing bolts. Um, so you get that. The starter's kind of a pain to get to. I don't even know. I've never had to put a starter in one of these 3 liter Toyota motors, so I don't know how they do it, but it looks to me like you have to take a lot of stuff out of your way to get it out. I have it unbolted and kind of pulled out of the way, but to actually get it out of the hole, I don't know. I'll try to show you what it looks like, and hopefully the quality is good enough that you can see something here. Let me see if I can turn on my light. So, yeah, starter sits in there. Um, it doesn't look it so bad now. I have it unbolted, obviously, so take that out. So yeah, you got to get to the bottom bolt on this is like a real hassle, to say the least. So yeah, you get that going on. The wiring, it's pretty. Wiring's pretty easy. All you gotta do for the wiring is there's just a there's only 3 or 4 plugs you gotta pull out. So if we look at the transmission, you get this plug here on the side, which uh, somehow corresponds to the shift selector type of deal. And then most of the rest of the harness is just run through these 2 plugs. There's various sensors all over the thing. There's a speed sensor, which I took out and left on the truck, but that was probably a mistake. If you can find a way to unplug the speed sensor and leave it in the transmission, that will probably save you a lot of heartache, honestly. So, let me see, what else was there? This, I think they call these a TV cable pretty often, throttle valve cable. Basically, this cable connects to your throttle body. So when you press the gas, it pulls on this, and it tells the transmission, basically it tells the valves inside the transmission how to shift. It changes the shifting pattern of it depending on how much throttle you give it. What else? So there's this cooler which is attached to the transfer case. So the transfer case and the transmission, I guess, don't share fluid between each other. They have their each own pan to hold the fluid and everything. So I don't know how you're supposed to check the level in your transfer case, since I guess they don't share fluid. That's why the transfer case has its own little cooler. Rather than trying to take the lines off the transfer case, I went ahead and unbolted the whole cooler right off the bracket. Just give me one less thing to deal with, kind of keeping it all together. What else we going on? So, yeah, it's not horrible. It's just time consuming dealing with all these little, small things. One thing I did was, rather than taking this line off, I cut it, and I'm gonna use compression fittings to put it back together. It just has rubber hoses that put it into the radiator for the cooler. It's one of those deals where the radiator and the transmission cooler are connected together. So being that the pressure's low enough that they could use rubber lines and clamps up in the front, I have no worries about using compression unions on this. And that'll make it so that, these are pretty rusty and crusty and hard to get off. So it made it so I can at least have the transmission out in front of me when I'm working on that fitting. So that'll be good. Drive shaft, I just took off the front, and the back U-joint on this drive shaft was just completely on there. But I'm just swapping the transfer case over, because the other transfer case, I don't know anything about it. I know for a fact that this transfer case works good. Try to minimize how many things I'm taking a chance on, when I'm working on these things. So, I know that this transmission wasn't good. And so I have another transmission from a junkyard, which anything you buy from a junkyard is always taking a chance. But the transfer case I know was good because I tried it and everything works good on that. So I'm just gonna swap this transfer case off of this and put it on the other transmission, because trying to wrestle in the next transmission will be a lot easier without a transfer case hanging off it, if I can do it that way, if that's gonna be something possible here. So that's what I'm gonna attempt. Yeah, as far as that goes, the hard thing about doing a transmission job, honestly, isn't the knowledge. It's just the logistics, if that makes sense. Trying to have a spot where you can work on it and take your time and keep track of where everything went and how it went together, because there's a lot of stuff on that transmission. There's a lot of bolts you gotta take out. If you're working out in your driveway, it can be done. I've seen it done on other vehicles, in some pretty harsh conditions and situations. But, it's a lot easier if you have the time to spend to do it the right way. Unless you're working on the same kind of car and the same kind of transmission over and over again, just pumping them out, which some people do. I know of guys that do just engines, for instance, in Nissans. Dealers will go out and buy these Nissans because they sell good. They'll buy like Maximas and You know, they'll buy like a bunch of whatever Nissan Maximas, we'll just say, and they all have that same V6 engine that always blows. So they pick them up for like junk price with pretty low miles with a blown motor. They got a deal where they just buy a bunch of that same motor from the junkyard at a wreck cars, and they got a guy. All he does all day long is just swap motors in those Maximas, and just bam, 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 bam. And you know, I know of a guy that does that, and he makes great money because he charges per motor. And guess what? He's charging $300 labor per motor, which doesn't sound like a lot, but when he can do 2 or 3 of those a day, every day, and you know he's got constant work. I'm pretty sure he does 3 of them a day. So you know he don't got like a full shop. He just does it out of his house. So he's making about $1,000 a day or so because I think he does 3 in a day and then starts another one. So one day he'll do 3, the next day he'll do 4. 3 one day, 4 the next. So you know he does that all day, every day, and he only does it on Nissans. I think he does it on more than Maximas. I think he does Sentras, Maximas, and a couple other little front wheel drive Nissans, and he's got a good little business going. You know, I think he does engines and transmissions actually, because you know they're just cars that are popular in this area. Dealers can move them, so they buy them. They buy them for cheap with bad motors. You know, I used to know a guy that he only liked Dodge trucks, and you know, it wasn't his full-time gig, but he'd make a lot of money parting out Dodge trucks, and he knew every single nut and bolt on a second-gen Dodge truck. You know, especially half-ton trucks because they're cheap, and he just makes stupid money. You know, especially when you know you just get them and part them all out. I talked to a guy when I had the hard body that parted out 240s. And I don't even know where you get 240s to part out at this point, but you're still getting them and did pretty good. So, you know, everybody has their niche, but doing these Toyota transmissions, these 4Runner transmissions isn't my niche, but, you know, I can figure out just about anything. So I'm working on it and not making horrible, our progress isn't horrible considering I'm not sitting here all day, all week. You know, if I really sat here all day, every day, you know, day after day, and did this, I could probably get it done in whatever 2 days, one day if I had an extra set of hands. Problem is the transmission's kind of bulky, and it's just really like tough to do some of this stuff by myself, and you know, it's just one of those things. I've probably spent more time waiting for the batteries to charge for my impact today than anything else. You know, if I wasn't waiting for batteries, I probably would have had this done about lunchtime. So think about, I probably got, you know, maybe 4.5 hours of constant labor into this, pulling it out, which isn't bad laying on your back. I don't got a lift in here. So, you know, transmission I've never touched before. 4.5 hours on my back pulling it out. I'm not too embarrassed about. And it's my experience, ironically, that it goes in easier than it comes out. I don't know if that's everybody's experience, but for me, that's how it normally goes. It goes back together way easier than it came apart. I don't understand why that is. I think for me, the reason why that happens is because I am overly cautious when I take something apart because I'm too worried about how I'm going to put it back together. I'm the type of guy that will sit there when I'm taking something apart and overthink it. And I'll sit there and I'll look at it apart and I'll be like, well, how am I going to keep track of that? How am I going to keep track of how that went? How am I going to keep track of this? And how am I going to remember how to do that? And so I sit there and I look at it for a long time when I'm taking it apart, thinking about my plan and instead of just busting through it. Whereas like other guys, I've seen some guys pull stuff apart really, really fast and then they have problems putting it back together. So I don't know. I don't know if you lose you're going to lose time on one end or the other. You know, you could say something about the guys that like me that overthink it, taking it apart, but it goes together really easy. Or you could say something about the guys that, you know, just beat and pound stuff out, but then have problems putting it back together and have to grind shit and have to buy new bolts and all kinds of crap. I mean, there's pros and cons to both types. If I was ever to hire a guy to work for me, I'd probably, ironically, prefer another guy like me because at least I know that he probably won't do too much damage. I've managed not to not to cost myself more money than I'm worth. So even though some stuff takes longer for me than it would for other people, I'm happy with it, you know. So anyhow, I guess I'll wrap it up, and just thought I'd show you guys the progress that's happened here, and wish you guys a happy 4th of July, and I'll catch you in the next one.